In this podcast episode, Ben Shapiro discusses the concerning trend of young people, particularly on TikTok, expressing support for Osama bin Laden and his anti-Western ideology. He highlights the fact that many young people are reading bin Laden's letter to America and finding themselves in agreement with his views, which is a troubling development. Shapiro points out that the current generation has been raised on the idea that success equals oppression and failure equals being oppressed, leading them to sympathize with bin Laden's grievances against the West. He discusses how the letter makes a case against the West, similar to the arguments made by radical Muslims and radical leftists in favor of Hamas. The letter accuses the West of being evil and aggressive, and bin Laden justifies his actions as a response to Western aggression. Shapiro presents examples of young people on TikTok reacting to bin Laden's letter, expressing shock and agreement with his views. He emphasizes that this trend is indicative of a larger problem where an entire generation has been taught to despise their own civilization and sympathize with anti-Western ideologies. The podcast also delves into recent protests outside the DNC headquarters in Washington, where left-wing protesters clashed with police during a demonstration for a ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas conflict. Shapiro highlights the violent nature of the protests and the lack of media coverage compared to the peaceful pro-Israel rally that took place earlier. Furthermore, Shapiro discusses the involvement of Democratic Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib in a Facebook group that has posted anti-Semitic content and expressed support for Hamas. He criticizes Tlaib's refusal to address questions about her anti-Semitic views and her alignment with the Hamas caucus within the Democratic Party. He also criticizes the media for granting credibility to lies coming from Hamas and for downplaying the actual anti-Semitism present in the actions of Hamas. He points out the media's focus on labeling Trump and Musk as anti-Semitic while ignoring the actual anti-Semitic actions of Hamas and its supporters. Shapiro also highlights the media's silence on the issue of Americans being held hostage by Hamas, despite their vocal criticism of Israel's actions in the conflict. Shapiro then discusses Joe Biden's meeting with Xi Jinping and questions the potential outcomes of the meeting. He expresses skepticism about the possibility of the U.S. and China working together, given China's history of aggressive actions and human rights violations. The podcast also delves into the internal struggles within the Republican Party, with Shapiro highlighting the lack of cohesion and leadership. He points out the challenges faced by the party in terms of policy priorities and the inability to come together to achieve meaningful results.